Hey, this is Kev with Blender Binge, back with another tutorial for you. This time we're going to be making this Obscurial, or Obscurus, that you've probably seen in a very famous magic movie that we will not name here. And we're going to do it in the shortest time as possible. So, let's go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and add in a UV sphere. And I'm going to take the UV sphere, and just to get the initial shape of this thing, this kind of magical tendril-y like thing, I'm going to go into sculpting. I'm going to go turn on Dino Topo, or Dyn Topo, and then I'm just going to start sculpting. I'm not going to worry too much about mirror being on right now. I don't really care. I'm just looking to get something a little messy that's not perfectly spherical. So I'm going to turn up strength, and I'm going to go and just add stuff to this. Okay, so now we got something kind of messy. So now I'm going to go back into layout, and I'm going to add particles to it. So to do that, I'm going to go over here to particles. I'm going to say new, and I'm going to say number, I'll leave it 1,000. Frame start 1, frame end 1. So that gives me all these particles. And I'll say about 15,000 to start. That covers it pretty nicely. Now what we have to do is we have to tell these particles to stay here. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to go to field weights. I'm going to turn gravity to 0. That's going to tell it to stay there. And then I'm going to go to velocity and normal. I'm going to turn that to 0. So now when I hit play, absolutely nothing happens except for the particles die. So let me turn lifetime over here to 500. It's an arbitrary number, doesn't have to be 500. I just want it to be longer than this. So now when I hit play, good. The particles are just staying there where they should. So now to make this whole thing work and look like the video I showed you in the beginning, I'm going to add, so I'm going to select this, okay, and I can rename this. I'm going to call this particles. And I'm going to say add, force field, and I'll say turbulence. And that adds a turbulence field. So now when I hit play, you'll see that these start moving. Except that they go crazy, and that's not the effect you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a few settings for this. So on field, I'm going to go down here to where it says this little physics button. And I'm going to add a flow to it. So my flow here, I'm going to put it 2.9. And you can see that immediately we'll start getting these kind of sticking together. So now they're not all blowing out. They're just doing what we want them to do. They're kind of just flowing and following each other in a kind of weird, magical kind of way. All right? So we like that. So next, I'm going to replace these guys, because they're not going to render very well for what we want, with a simple shape. So to do that, I'm going to say add mesh plane. I'm going to bring this guy out, all right? And I'm just going to make 3 of these and hit them together. So I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate this guy, and then I'm going to rotate them 90 degrees. Okay, and then I'm going to Shift D again, hit enter, and rotate this guy 90 degrees on the X. When I got something like that, that should be good enough. I'm going to select all 3 of these planes, 1, 2, 3, holding shift, hit Control J, and now they're one object. So I can shrink that down a little bit. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to kind of pull that out of the way. So I'm going to shrink that down, get that out of the way, and now I'm just going to go to the particles here, and I'm going to tell the particles to use this. So to do that, I'm simply going to go to particles, and I'm going to go to physics. I'm going to set rotation, and then underneath render, I'm going to say render as, I'm going to say object, and then I'm going to choose the object. So let's take this plane thing and name it Sparkle. Why not? Sparkle. I don't know. You can name it whatever you want. I'm calling mine Sparkle. Sparkle. Go back to particles. And I'll say object, instance object, sparkle. So now I have the sparkle, these little things, all over my object. And when I hit play, you'll see that they kind of do their thing, except you can't really see them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up the object scale, and I think I'll turn that up to 0.25. It's pretty good. So now, when I hit play, you'll see that I have this moving. And it's kind of doing what I want. But I still have this big, ugly thing in here. So we're going to take care of that now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to shading. And for this guy, I'm just going to hit new. And all I need to do here is just kind of, well, if I disconnect that, it just goes to black. So I'm just going to plug him into volume for now. And you'll see he's pretty much gone because we're not using volume shading or anything here. So that's gone. So now I can take these particles. Okay, so I'm going to go to sparkle here. I'm going to hit new. And I'm just going to make this base color black. And I'm going to give this metallic of 1 and a roughness pretty low for now. And you see here that we're now going to get this object kind of doing what we want. So if I go back here to layout and I go to shading, the shaded view here for EEVEE, and I hit play, you can see that we start getting this really cool effect happening, which is very particle-like. And then for EEVEE, if we go back up here, and I'll turn on bloom, I'll turn on, yeah, just turn all these on for now. I don't need subsurface scattering. I don't need ambient occlusion. But now we'll get motion blur and a little bloom, and you'll see that we're getting this really cool kind of wispy magical effect happening. So now we need to put it in an environment. To do that, I'll go to shading, I'll go to world, and I'll get rid of background here. And what I'll do is I'll hit add, texture, environment texture, plug that into surface. I'll go to shading here so we see we're in this rendered mode. I'll hit open, and I'm going to go to my HDR maps, and I'm going to choose this one I got off HDR iHaven called Snowy Forest Path. So here we have the snowy path. And if I hit 0 on the keyboard, we'll be in with our camera. And then I'm going to hit this little button over here, open it up, and say lock camera to view. So now I can move around and you can see that I have this thing happening. So for the time being, I'm going to turn off depth of field. And you can see that we have this scene being lit now by our HDR image. All right, so this is in the background. So now let's draw the bubble around this guy. To do that, I'm going to go add, mesh, and I'll say UV sphere. I'm going to scale the UV sphere up so it surrounds this guy. And then I'm going to go object, and I'll say shade smooth. Gets rid of that pixelation look, faceted look. And then I'll go world, go back to object, give him a shader. And this time, principled shader is fine, and I'm going to put the transmission up to 1, so he's transparent. But you can't see it yet because we have to tell this shader that it has to be transparent with EEVEE. So to do that, we want refraction to happen. So we're going to go down here to shader, go all the way to the bottom where it says opaque, screen space refraction. We're going to turn that on, and refraction depth here, we can play with that. And I'll put it at, let's say, 0.1. And now roughness, we take down, and we start getting this ball shape. And to get this to show through fully, we have to go to screen space reflections over here, and we have to turn on refraction. Now you see this inside the bubble. So if I go here to layout, all right, and I hit play, you start seeing it. Especially if I hit 0 and I frame it, you now see that we have this effect happening inside here. So all we have to do now is just tighten up the effect. So to do that, I'm going to add a little bit of warping to my bubble. So to do that, I'm going to go to sphere, which I could just rename bubble. Okay, I'm going to go to bubble, and I'm going to go to modifier. I'm going to say add modifier, and I'm going to say displace. And I'm going to add a texture into the displace. So I'm going to hit new for texture, and then from texture, okay, where it says image or movie, I'm going to go down and hit clouds. And the type of clouds I'm going to use, I'm going to say improved Perlin, type soft, grayscale is fine, and size. All right, I'm going to blow up the size a bit. Depth I'm going to take to 0. All right, size I blow up. And if I go back over to my deform tab, it says texture coordinates local. I can control this deformation with an empty. So I'm going to go add, empty. I'll say plane axis, and I'll just leave it as empty. And then I'm going to go back to my bubble, and I'm going to go to my modifiers. I'm going to say texture coordinates. I'm going to say object, and then object, I'm going to choose the empty. And now, if I hit the empty, and I move the empty around, you'll see it kind of undulates, and it moves this guy around a bit. So we can keyframe that in a little while. All right, but now we also have to, we should add a subdivision here too. So I'm going to go back to my bubble, modifiers, add modifier, subdivision surface. I'll push that up above. Okay, maybe add a few subdivisions, and then texture here. I could say the strength, I could take the strength down a little bit, 0.2 maybe. And now when I move the empty around, you'll see that it undulates, but not a whole lot. So I could keyframe this undulation here if I want. So I could go over here, and at frame 1, I could say insert keyframe, and then say I want this to be 120 frames long. All right, I'll pull that guy over here. All right, and then insert keyframe, and then I have this undulation happening with this happening at the same time. So there's our effect, and there we go. Now I could also just make this easier for myself by saying end 120, and now I'm only dealing with these frames here. Let me pull this up for you here so you can see this. All right. So here, if I hit play, you can see the effect happening. And one last thing we can do here is I can hide this sparkle object. Don't need it, and don't need it to render. I could have just pushed it out of the frame, or I could just hide it, doesn't matter. And I'll say I can't select it either. So it's there, and it's affecting this, but it's not visible. So here's our effect. And now all it's left to do is we can come in and we can play with EEVEE a little bit. And we can play with bloom. All right. We could up the intensity or lower the intensity. And we can play with our camera to get that nice shallow depth of field. So to do that, all I have to do is I'll add, I could use this. So I'm going to go ahead, go to camera, and I'm going to say depth of field, and it makes it all blurry. And then for camera, I'm going to go to the camera, depth of field, focus on object, and I'll say bubble. And then the f-stop here, I can turn all the way down, and you could start getting a depth of field. So I'm not sure what, see in a real camera, like you'd have like F2 through I don't know, 11, 12. But here it's like you're getting this decimal value here, but I don't know, it's working, so I'm just gonna use it. And I'll blur out that background a little bit so you get a better effect. And then I can also kind of play with where the light is so that you could see this better. So if I were to go to shading, go to world, inside of here, I can add a vector. So I can go add, vector, mapping, and I could throw that in. And then over here I have to add a texture coordinate. So I'll do input texture coordinate. And I'll just say from generated to vector, that maps again. And now I can go ahead and I can rotate the Z. and I can find a place that looks kind of interesting where the light's falling. I can also scale it on the Y and kind of push things back just a little bit and still be rotating and find a place where it looks kind of interesting. And there's my effect. Now what else I can do is I can go into my particles. So if I go to particles and I go back down here to particles and I can say number, this is going to really slow things down, but it's going to make this look a lot better. And I'll just go ahead and say 25,000 or 250,000. So that really makes this thick. So what I can do from here to make this effect better is I can just cache this. All right. And I have to save my file. So it says to do that, let's go to layout here. To do that, let's save the file. So file, save as. Okay, so I saved my file, Obscurus 3. And now what I can do is I can go here to particles. And I can go to particles. I can say cache. I'll say disk cache. And I'll say bake. And what that's going to do is it's going to bake this and it'll make it go a little bit faster for us. So I'm going to pause it. You can see this is baking right here. I'll pause it while it's going and you'll see it go. Okay, so we're back and it finished baking. And now let me click off this. I'll click onto the empty or something. And you can see it kind of move. It's not going to play real time because there's a whole lot of stuff happening in here. But you can see we got our effect. Lastly, we could just leave it as is, or we can animate the camera. So to do that, I'll just select the camera. And let's see. Let me turn off particles here, the view, so it goes faster. And I will set my camera. So I'll set a keyframe here, insert keyframe, and I'll go all the way to the end. And maybe I will, let's see, push them out a bit. All right, insert keyframe. All right, so I got a little bit of motion going. Going across the frame. If I turn this back on, you can see particles happen. And you're getting that effect. Now, obviously, the more particles you have, you could use fluid inside here and get more of a fluid effect. But this is a really quick and dirty way to set this up and get something that's somewhat cool looking, kind of cool looking effect and somewhat believable. And when you render this out, you can color correct it and do whatever you want and it'll look great. Lastly, we can go in here too and we can add lights. So if I wanted to add a light in here to kind of give it some cool like little lightning effect thing happening of energy, I could go in, I can add a point light. Okay, there's our point light. I can go to light over here. I could turn it to blue. All right, turn off shadow. I don't need it to cast a shadow. And let's see where it's at. It's right inside it, so I could kind of push it to the front a little bit. Power, take that down. 10 watts is kind of high. I'll go to 5. Lightens it. And then here, okay, so we can keyframe this by just right-clicking on 5 watts here, saying insert keyframe. I can actually hit 0. Enter. All right, keyframe it. To replace keyframe, I can go to the next frame up, and I'll turn off particles again because it's making things drag. All right, go here, 5 watts. Insert keyframe, go down here, maybe turn it to 1 watt, insert keyframe, go back here, turn it to 5 watts, insert keyframe, and finally kill it off over here, add 0. So now you'll see here, if I turn this back on and I scrub through here, you see that we have kind of this little energy thing happening here. So it goes on, and dims, goes on again, dims, and goes off. So I can place this randomly by just clicking out randomly in my settings here. And I can hit Control C, Control V to paste. Go somewhere else random. Control V. And one last one over here. Control V. So now that'll happen randomly. And lastly, I can render it by just going up here to my output. I can say output, Obscurus here. I can call it Obscurial, I don't know, 3, whatever, .mp4 if I don't want to render out EXRs, okay? Just an MP4. Hit accept. And file format, I could say FFmpeg video. And then encoding, I can choose H.264 in MP4, check it, looks good. Hit render, render animation, and come back when it's done. Okay, so here you have the render, and there's always a bunch of more stuff you can do with it, like color correct and render it out in layers and do a whole bunch of other things with it. But that's the basics of it without making this video 18 hours long. This should definitely help you create this kind of effect. So hopefully that helps. If it does, hit like, subscribe, share it, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.